Well, hello there, and it is I here at the Airstream Studio, and just checking in on a Saturday. And the funny thing is, when I look outside, I actually see wild turkeys. So for you that are in the United States that are looking forward to next November in more ways than one, because not next November, next month I meant, then you'll be thinking those turkeys probably aren't long for this world. Some of you may know that I'm actually broadcasting from Canada, some about the 49th parallel. It's I grew up in a place that was actually below the 49th parallel, dipped right into the States. We've had our Thanksgiving. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Thanksgiving. I think you guys celebrated your Columbus Day, and we had our Thanksgiving meal. I actually went over to a friend's place, and he made a really nice crock pot kind of combination. It was a roast. It was not a turkey. And kind of ironic because I'm surrounded by turkeys here in more ways than one. So you may see that there's a different sort of background here for those that are tuning in for the first time in a while. I have my incredible toolbox back there. I just love that thing. It's been with me for a long, long time, traveling around in the Airstream. And if I move like this, you can see there's some of the props that I use for my photography, and also for filmmaking, all sorts of different things. So what I've basically done is consolidated the Airstream Studio together with the broadcast studio together with the photography studio. I used to have a bricks and mortar studio. Well, it was a few years ago now, actually. It was not exactly, it wasn't exactly a recent thing than when I had my photography studio. Excuse me while I look away. Very impolite of me. Anyway, just trying to do my own engineering too. So I'm just getting back in the saddle again. I'm using different software. I have decided that it's probably not important as far as doing a regular broadcast. It doesn't matter which software I use as long as it works. When I was doing a PSYOP recovery program, I was using sort of a wireless system, and it was great. Except I'm not really keen on doing wireless if I don't have to. And it's great to be able to switch cameras and that sort of thing, but it takes up a lot of resources, as those of you that have ever done this know. So I decided to do a wired system for a while, just because I think that it makes a lot more sense when I'm trying to share various things, or when I have guests on. And I do hope that we're going to have Dr. Judy Wood back, and she's just incredibly busy. And I've been trying to help where I can and to make life a little bit simpler for her, even though I've been in the midst of my own move. So I spent about let me see, how long would that be? Would have been about a year, just over a year, away from where I was living. So a year and a half ago, 2 years ago in March, my partner Tom died. And lots of you know about that if you've tuned in at all. So it's sort of the continuing story of Tom. And I do like to remember him because he was really keen on the Airstream Studio. And I have to say that it's been a lot of transitioning and a lot of changes. But I bought the Airstream about 10 years ago. I did quite a big job. I'm, as I said, a filmmaker, media maker. I'm a third generation filmmaker. So I used to have a photography studio, and I taught filmmaking to kids. And I was doing some filmmaking in the early 2000s. And then I moved for my husband's work. We'd been married for 23 years or something. And I used to have a business where we lived, and it's very difficult to move a business from one place to another. So when we moved, he was a professor at a university, and so because we were moving, for that, I thought it might be a fun idea to have a mobile studio, which I've always wanted. My dad was really into Airstreams, and he was the second generation filmmaker. So I thought it would be kind of an interesting idea to take something that he loved, sort of honor him, because he hasn't been with us since 2002, and take that and convert it into what you now are seeing in behind me of the Airstream Studio. It's a 1969 Overlander. It's 26 feet long. And yes, I do drive a truck and I do pull it around. And people are often really surprised by the fact that I can I not only pull this thing, but I can actually back it up as well. I have a fifth wheel hitch as well. So I have a 1989 Ford F-250. And it's a four-wheel drive, and I really love it. Buck the truck. Again, some of you may have heard some of these stories, and I'm just kind of putting them all together. I think I got Buck just around the time, just before Tom died. And so there's a sentimental quality to it as well. But one of the things I had at our place, we had 5 acres. We had a little river running through. Now, I have to say that Tom moved from the city and then he moved to the country. And at that time, real estate prices were such that he could buy 5 acres after selling a little apartment in the city. So I had the advantage of that. So it was his place completely. And he wanted me to live there. I had a suite downstairs. And we were planning to get married. We were at the point where we were doing a prenuptial agreement. And this is important to know because some people wonder how it could happen that I had this incredible place and then was basically homeless. Well, I was renting my own place, and it's a tight market. It's very hard to find a place. And so I was renting here, and I'm going to say it on the island because I do live on an island. I grew up on a bigger island. Now I live on a smaller island, and so Tom had moved over to enjoy island life, and it's an amazing community, and I missed it when I was not here for a year and a half. But trying to keep the sequence of events in the proper order, I had this place that I lived in, but it was quite rat infested. And I was in denial because there's a really there's the vacancy rate. It's just, and I really didn't want to move out of my place. But I think Tom was right when he said that I was just not noticing, or I was like, things were getting eaten. We're talking about. Sometime I'll put some pictures up. But it was serious, and the landlord was not going to do much of anything except for give me some poison. Well, I had a beautiful Siberian Husky at that time and my beautiful kitty, and I didn't want to have rat poison out. I didn't think that was a very good solution at all. I think that, you fix the problem, you seal up the holes, and it was on a farm, so you're always going to have a problem with, as they would say, mice on a farm, and I get that. But no, these were rats, and they were eating things, and so there was quite an infestation, shall we say. And so I had asked if we could just, put some wire around, and there's some things you can do to actually, you can sink some wire down, and because it was built on a slab. This is a lot of information, but I'm trying to set the scene for you because I would not have moved out of that place. I really enjoyed the location, everything about it, except the fact that it was rat infested, and I was not getting a lot of help from the landlord. And unfortunately, when you live in a tight market, when you're renting, as some of you will know, it can be a real landlord situation. So the landlord has the advantage, I guess, in that case. And I guess what I was doing when I moved out over to Tom's place and had the suite, we did share the house together, but he really needed help. I thought he was getting a lot better from an illness he'd had a couple of years before. He'd had struggles, and I didn't understand. I did not understand the full scope of what was going on. I knew he was diabetic, but the place that he bought was one that I had found because I'm a bit of a real estate person. I've had several places over my lifetime. Started buying real estate when I was 19, and there's all sorts of things that have happened in the meantime that have meant that I've also lost the real estate. But the point is that it's sort of a Proverbs 31 thing. If you read Proverbs 31, you see that it says she can look at a piece of land and know that it's worth something. I can't remember the exact turn of phrase, but people used to call me Proverbs 31 woman, and because I bought a place with my first husband, Ken. I was married when I was 17, and we bought a place on Salt Spring Island, one of the Gulf Islands, and it was an amazing place, and we got it for just a ridiculous price. But anyway, it was like this thing of getting in early, getting my dibbies in early, and we were able to purchase this place, and things just came together. So suffice it to say, I am pretty good at, especially on islands, because you've got to deal with wells, and you've got to deal with septic tanks, and you've got to deal with a whole different set of issues that you might not have if you're living in the city. So I found this. We looked at quite a few places. He put offers in on places. Then he had inspections done, and there would always be something that was not quite right, and that's why you have inspections done. As he said, he really was paying the wages for all these different inspectors that were coming and taking a look at these pieces of property, because I think he probably had 5 offers in, and so there's always something going on. So anyway, the place that we ended up getting was this beautiful log cabin, and Tom was 6'4", and just a very substantial person, and it just suited him so well because he's a hunter, and he had all these antlers that he'd had. I mean, he had just so much stuff. He was an only child, and he inherited all his parents' stuff as well. But he had this whole garage full of stuff. But he'd never really been able to put his antlers up. so this was a really great place for him. So it was interesting because in another life I might have been a realtor, because I can just sort of see the person and what they might need and kind of put that together with a piece of property. And I have to say that this was the perfect place for him. There is, one of the things about living on an island is that it's good to have backup. And I like to have a wood stove, and to have, it's great if you can have water and you can have a backup for electricity, that sort of thing. So this had a river running through it, an actual little, it was a seasonal river. But the other great thing is that it had a rental home on the property. I'm talking about, he was able to sell his place and an apartment, and buy this other place, and it was basically the same price. So it was an amazing deal because it was a motivated seller, and we were actually helping him out because he needed to sell it. And so there's a rental home that was fully rented, of course. So the vacancy rate is ridiculous here. So his realtor in the city thought that I was exaggerating, pulling his leg, whatever, until he talked to the realtor that I found here to be able to talk to him about the fact that, yes, we have a really crazy rental market, and it will never be a problem to rent this out, upper and lower suite. So I would not be able to move into that place, but there was also, what I liked was there was a suite downstairs in the log cabin as well. So I think you're getting a picture. But one of the cool things that he did was he bought this, it used to be a sawmill, this place. So there was a 40 by 25 by 25 structure, I'm going to call it. And, I have the Airstream, and also I do these workshops. So it was a great place to be able to, put my Airstream and to have it under cover and back the truck, and to be able to do the workshops. So he bought that as sort of a separate deal on top of the piece of land. So that was supposed to be my part of the deal. Now, it sounds as though I wasn't really earning my way. Well, I was earning my way. It's just that he was a very generous person. And so, yeah, needless to say, his kids were not thrilled about the idea that anyway, that was a whole piece that I don't want to get into too much. But anyway, I knew that anything that he had was definitely his kids, and his daughter was the executor, and there was some estrangement there. Anyway, I came to realize why. Tom, unfortunately, he was diabetic, but he was also an alcoholic. And I've never lived with an alcoholic before, so I didn't understand exactly how. I didn't understand the fact that alcoholics are, and I hate to say this, but they're liars. They lie about things because it's the only way that they can do what they're doing. And I could see why there would have been problems with his kids. I'm trying to bring this all around because I knew that there were problems, and I knew that that they'd been hurt. And but my thing is that I believe that everyone is can have another chance, and I think he learned a lot through the process. And so unfortunately, that doesn't always work out. We have free will, which is a very fortunate thing. So we get to do what we want to, and I know that sometimes it's very difficult to forgive our parents when they've done things that are cowardly or dishonest or whatever. But I got a sense in having, he used to come over and visit sometimes. He would stay in one of the rooms in my other house. And see, I just didn't have the same kind of situation where I could see what was happening with the drinking. I got an inkling of it, but that's me. That's my fault, my problem, and I just didn't understand it. So it was interesting because at the beginning of this year, Dr. Judy and I were talking about on the PSYOP recovery program. We were talking about honesty and how we were going to spend this year really checking ourselves and making sure that we were having integrity in that way. Well, I mean, she's an incredibly honest person anyway, and that's what I love about Where Do the Towers Go, because it's just her incredible ability to see things as they are that allows her to be able to see something like see something in the images that the rest of us miss. And I think that has a lot to do with the honesty factor, because if we are dishonest with ourselves enough, we begin to see things differently. We begin to see things, it's like the rat infestation. It's exactly the same thing. I was really in denial. And it was only when I was moving out and I saw the damage, the amount of damage and the amount of literal crap. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And part of it was that I did have a lot of stuff like pushed together, and that is not recommended. That was hanging on hangers. But anyway, there's something, there's always that part too, that I could have probably reconfigured things or put them into Tupperware or done something. But it's a really interesting thing. So I was thinking about honesty. I was thinking about the fact that we look at things in a way that is not always, it's not meant to be malevolent. Sometimes it is. Sometimes, sorry, I've got something in my eye. Sometimes it is malevolent. Sometimes we're doing things to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. Sometimes it's because we're an alcoholic. Sometimes it's because we have been damaged when we were kids. Sometimes it's to get our way, but it doesn't always mean that we're doing it as a sinister thing. But there is a line at which things do become sinister. And so that's why I've been kind of focusing on this Elizabeth Warren story. And I know it's old, and I'm not interested in being the first off the mark. I'm interested in being more analytical about the stories and the things that come up in the press, because I look at the world that we're in, and I look at the next generation, and I realize that the things that are happening and the things that they're seeing play a large part in how they see the world and how they the kind of lens that they see things through. Now, Tom's daughter did some pretty despicable things to have me ousted from the house. She lied. And so basically I was surrounded by all these lies. And I found out later that Tom had lied as well, and to one of my kids. And and I've also I've got a whole bunch of situations where there's just lies. And my situation as a Christian is difficult, because people will say that I put up with too much or whatever, and then other people will say, I'm sure if you lived with me you wouldn't think that, because I have this line that it when I find out somebody's lied to me, like I trust them, and then I find out they've lied to me, and it really triggers something. And I've learned how to deal with that over the years. It used to make me incredibly angry, like the hypocrisy, and I would confront them. A friend of mine said, he smokes and he drinks beer, and he said, this is the last. I'm gonna have this. What do you call it? A case of beer and a case of cigarettes, I guess he had. And as soon as he finished that was it. I'm thinking, why say that to me? I don't care. It's nothing to do with me. You want to smoke, you want to drink, go ahead. I get to choose whether I want to be friends with people, and I smoked in the past, and I have smoked since. I don't smoke, but the thing is, this is the thing about free will. We get to do whatever we want, but don't tell me that you're going to do something, and then go and do the opposite, or at least give fair warning and say, you know what, I changed my mind. And this is what character driven is about to me. It's not about the idea that we all have to have the same values. It's that when we express our values, we have integrity. And when we express something, when we say we're going to do something, that we'll follow through. We'll do that thing. And the thing that really bothers me is when somebody says to me, oh, I'm going to do this thing, and then they do the opposite, or they don't do that thing, or they say, well, I never really said I was going to do that. And I have to say, it was kind of crazy making for me. I've gone through, I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's nothing compared to what my father had. But I think when you were raised with somebody who has that, he actually was in the Second World War and the Korean War, and he was shell-shocked, and, he, all sorts of legitimate reasons for him to have PTSD, but he was a very difficult person for me. Like, I loved him dearly, and we did some really great things together. But if I closed the door too loudly, after he was in the military, he had a hard time finding work, and he worked shift work, and he would have me go back and turn the door handle 10 times quietly. Turn the handle, pull it, let go, and make it so that it was quiet, right? So at the time I thought, well, this is, just a good way for me to learn how to be quieter. And I did go to a counselor who said, you don't take up very much space. You try to take up a smaller amount of space than most people. And I think that was as a result of my dad and the way that, things triggered him, and I would never know what was going to trigger him. And like if we were in the car, and he wasn't meaning to do these things, I don't think, in a malicious way, but I just came to realize that if I did the wrong thing, and I never knew what that was, there was going to be a reaction. So if we're driving, and I think we had lap belts. I think we had seat belts, but he would just be driving, and then he would make an error, I guess, in judgment, and then he would reach over and almost slap me against the seat, to which he thought was protecting me from being flung forward. So again, I think that it's a matter of his stuff. He would have these. I had the bedroom underneath him, and you could hear the actual bed come up off the ground and then come slamming back down again. Those are the kind of dreams he would have, and so I just got used to, because my brothers and my sister was 17 years older than me. My brothers were 7 and 5 years older than me. So my sister got married when I was 3, and I was an auntie when I was 4. And so there's a lot of responsibilities that I had early on in life. And I also had my brothers leave quite early. So there was quite a bit of time there where I was still fairly young, and I was dealing with my mom and my dad. My mom was physically ill. My dad was mentally ill. And as I look back on things and I see how I care give to other people like Tom, and to even to my own kids, I see this same thing coming out in me where it's like everything's great, and then all of a sudden there's this thing that happens that comes out of left field, and I get freaked out. And and I'm going to talk in another video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the physical stuff too. And this is something that people don't talk about very often. And I'm sure there's lots of guys that don't want to talk about it. But I just want to say that for many, many years, I had 6 kids, and it wasn't so, it wasn't a problem when I was pregnant. But when I wasn't pregnant, I used to hemorrhage. I couldn't even remember the word. My mother hemorrhaged as well. I mean, she had blood problems. That was one of her illnesses, was that she had really serious blood problems. It was just with me, I just lost a lot of blood every month, and I would keep my period just didn't stop. And so there was a point at which I found out that my aunt had actually died from this. She lost so much blood. And there came a point too where my doctor said, you're going to have to do something, because I had a very physical job. I was carrying around photography equipment, and my husband, my second husband, Tim. So Ken and I split up. That was a bit of an abusive relationship. I love Ken. I've done a video about Ken, a little tribute to him. He died in 1995, but I don't want anyone to think that, I was a widow. We had already been divorced, and it was sad. I miss Ken all the time. There was never a sense with Ken that I didn't love him. I was angry because I felt like he didn't want to change. And of course, he could probably say this. Although, anyway, there's a whole video. If you take a look at it, I did it on July 27th, and it's a tribute to Ken, and I won't get into it here. But then my second husband was what I have come to realize was a narcissist. I mean, complete and utter narcissist. And so just to get back to the bleeding thing, is that I would have a wedding scheduled, and I needed help carrying things, and he knew what the situation was. My kids didn't, but he did. And I just physically needed the help carrying things sometimes, and I never knew when I was going to be bleeding. Now I think it's really important to talk about this, because no one does. It's kind of like the last bastion that's held out, but this is happening, and people will just go, oh, she's on the rag, or no. Sometimes it's like my blood count was down below an accident victim. And I don't really know all about blood counts, but I know it was down at 9 at one point. And I know that a lot of people's you're supposed to be up at 50 or something, and an accident victim's at 20. And I will figure that out one of these days. If there's any doctors or nurses out there in the audience, you'll understand. But anyway, I was anemic, to say the least. But I was on death's door a lot of the time. And I just had to carry on, because I had 6 kids and I had a business. And in fact, I hired my second husband. And so that's where I met him, was through that. And, I really wanted him to sort of strike out on his own once we did get married. I wasn't intending to marry him, but, once we were married, I didn't want to be the boss. And I definitely wanted to have us diversify, because we had all these kids. And when Ken died, definitely I needed to know that he was deriving his income from a different place from where I was, because I felt a lot of pressure, like what happens if my business fails, what happens if I go under. So there was a huge amount of pressure. And but the thing that bothered me was that he was one of the only ones, I think he was the only one except for my doctor, who knew that I was hemorrhaging. And I mean, I would stand up and, whew, I mean, it was really, I had to have layers that I could wrap around myself in case that happened. And again, I'm being very candid because, and this is all part of the coming clean. This is part of the not lying to ourselves. It's sort of like the rats. So I'm going back to that idea that when this happened, it was something that I was kind of in denial about, and I was also doing a thing where I just go, I don't want to have an operation, and there must be a way to do this in a healthy way to resolve the problem. But there was one wedding where he was supposed to come and help me, and he was he was volunteering to do this other thing, and things got switched around, and he chose to do that rather than help me with the wedding. So there were a lot of markers. There were a lot of points at which I sort of went, no, this is not a good choice. This is not the right choice. And it ended up that, I mean, when he became a professor, he was getting phone calls from the young girls that were in his class. And why they had a cell phone, I don't know. But my sister warned me about it too. She said, why is he getting calls from, they want him to go to a party. Oh, are you going to the party? No, I'm not going to the party. Anyway, suffice it to say that he ended up having an affair with a peer of his. And but he did a setup. He clearly was, he was clearly having an affair, and he came home late, and I'd made his dinner for him. And, there's a whole story there, which I'll tell sometime. But the point is that he was already primed for, but I think the fact that I had his dinner ready for him, and it was 10:30 at night, and I think he was expecting that it was going to cause problems, and he was going to have a big argument with me. And I was all ready for bed, and I was, I said, "There's your dinner," because when he left very abruptly, and there were things that we could have argued about, but we didn't. Or I didn't want to participate in the argument. Basically, all I just said was that, I just let him know that I was frustrated. And I said, but I'm going to bed. There's your dinner. And then he said, I want a divorce, So it was like, you don't do that at 10:30 at night, particularly when somebody's just about to go to bed. Anyway, this whole thing happened after that. And I'll tell you about it sometime. But it was very, very, very traumatic. And to this day, this is the first time I've talked about it. And if my kids ever saw this, they'd just go, "Oh, why are you telling that story? That's not true," whatever. But so here's the deal. Here's what I'm trying to get at. Trying to tell the truth. This is my, my vow that I made at the beginning of the year to you, the audience, and that Dr. Judy and I were talking about. And this has been really plaguing me, this whole situation. Does this mean that when I don't tell the truth about something where people have been lied to, that it's up to me to correct things, or do I just let things go? Because I'm very much a believer that God is in control, and I've handed the situation over to him. But I've actually had a sense that I need to talk about the situation as a whole, and some of the things around that, because there could be people out there who could benefit from this, who, you don't feel like you want to be malicious at all. You don't want to get back at people, and that is in no way I feel that Christ is my advocate. I don't need to have vindication. But I think when it comes to estrangement within a family, because one person has chosen to tell a lie about another person, it's important that we get the truth out somehow. And now it's become quite a huge ball of wax because of the complication of Tom as well, because there was a situation with him. Now, again, like when people have problems, whether they're alcoholics or whether they just have chosen to smoke or to whatever it is that they've chosen to do, all of that's fine. But the problem that we have is when we lie to ourselves, whether it's that we have rats in the house, or whether it's because we are sicker than we're telling other people that we are, and we need help, which is one of the reasons that Tom needed me to live over at his place, was because he was ill and he couldn't handle the whole place. And he did want me to live over there, and he did want to get married, but he needed to come clean and say, I'm terminally ill, right? And that's so what happened when he died was that when I went over to the hospital, I was feeling just absolutely terrible. And again, I could, all of these are stories in and of themselves. I mean, I was just, I took a backpack with me, followed the ambulance. We had to go on a ferry. So he wasn't being airlifted. So I thought, well, it can't be that bad. But they were trying to stabilize him in the ambulance, and the doctor was with him the whole time, which was amazing. Went over in the ambulance and they were monitoring. So I was fully expecting to bring him back home with me. And I was there waiting for them to stabilize him. And I waited for hours and hours and hours. And I was by myself. And I knew that if I tried calling his daughter, she wouldn't answer the phone. And so I called my son, who had a relationship with Tom. And right away, it was like, well, why didn't you call earlier? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Right. And I have enough guilt in my life. I feel very guilty about things anyway. And so I guess that's probably why maybe I don't have the respect of my kids, because they know that I'm willing to go there. And maybe I've been defensive. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know. I don't see myself the way other people do. However, all I know is that the doctor came to me and actually gave me a big hug and just said, the more we learn, they got his charts from the city where he'd come from. And this was another town. And the more they learned at the hospital, the more they were saying, we're trying, but there's nothing we can do. And then finally they said he was terminally ill. He was given a couple of years to live. And that had been a couple of years, more than two years before. So I hadn't known Tom for that whole time. All I knew was that he'd been really ill, and that he was on the mend in his way. He was planning for the future. He bought this place. And I do say, I'm really thankful that he had that time living in that beautiful place, and that we had that time together, and it was quite idyllic. And I think that was all the more the tragedy, because, my son got to know him quite well, and he was a wonderful man. So this is the complexity of life, right? This is the part about telling the truth. We can be wonderful people, and we can be absolutely well-meaning in terms of what we're doing. Maybe we're in denial ourselves, just like with the rats. So, I'm putting myself in the same category because I understand the concept, and I'm sure I've done lots worse than living in a house with rats. But it's like Tom was living in his own house with rats, and he was in denial. And had I been able to see what I saw that night when he died, with the doctors coming to me and saying, we've had a chance to look at the charts, we've had a chance to look at the diagnosis that he was given, and he was on his way out. There was nothing you could have done. And to this day, I feel the guilt. So that was, and then this series of events took place where his daughter took over the house, and it's really hard to talk about this, and I will talk about it, because when you add up all of these things together, you go, wow, maybe I am a really bad person. Maybe I did some things that were really, that were really wrong. And then I've got this voice of reason, which is, whether it's the police officers that have attended, or the people, the officials, the people from outside, the doctors, the police officers, the people who've looked at the counselors, whatever, have looking in from the outside, I've been able to say, yeah, your thinking is all wrong. So sometimes we're lying to ourselves in another way, which is, whether it was that I was hemorrhaging or whether I had rats in the house or any of these things where I thought I could handle it. I thought I could do it. I thought that this was the right thing to do. And it was the over responsible me. And it was interesting because I went to a counselor many, many years ago. I was a marriage counselor, and they said, sometimes being responsible can be just as much of a sin as the idea of not being responsible. Because, I guess there's an arrogance too that about, I had just been super responsible from the time I was a kid. I was an aunt, as I said, when I was 4 years old, and my mom would say, because she was ill, my dad was ill. And so, I guess there was guilt on her part too, that she couldn't be fully the grandmother that she wanted to be. And so she would say, well, you're the aunt, you're the auntie. I had no idea what that meant, but I did know that if my nieces came and drew with red pen all over my doll, I had to suck it up. And I don't even like to tell these stories because I love my nieces. They were like sisters to me, and I'm sure that I did things that were completely annoying to them too. But I just know that my bedroom, for instance, got taken over when they would come and visit, and I had to learn how to be mature. I had to learn that, even though Thumbelina had red pen all over her face, that, it'll come off, and you start to learn how to rationalize things. And that's another form of lying to oneself. So that's really what I'm trying to get at through this whole roundabout way of going through this process of explaining things, is that we can be lying to ourselves and be the most, it could be the most responsible thing that we could possibly be doing. We think it's really responsible to just to ignore the fact that there's red pen on Thumbelina's face. But really, my mother should have allowed me to express my frustration with that. I should have been allowed to say, that's not okay. And you guys, like there's certain things in the house that are mine. So I don't want to make this too long, but I just want to fast forward to how that translated into my parenting, because I used to do childcare in my home. I was a writer, photographer, as I mentioned, but I also had all these kids. And so we were having a struggle paying the rent sometimes. So I thought, well, what a great thing. People come to my door, and some people needed just part-time childcare and that sort of thing. So I started offering that out of my house. And one of the things that I would do is really protect my kids' stuff. So there was this, one of the kids that I looked after, Tyler. He was great, but he was an only child. He was used to having his own space. And he would come in sometimes and he would play with my kids' stuff. And, they shared their things. I don't think I made them share, but I may have. I may have said, you need to share your stuff, which I would never do now. But, I did that. I may have done that then. You'd have to ask them what they recall. But I was really big on this thing of stuff. Like, if you don't want to share it, then you need to put it away somewhere where nobody knows it's there. And that, at least that's what I remember in my own brain. But I do know this about Tyler, was that he would bring something in, like a car that he really wanted to bring along. And his mom would let him do that, but then he didn't want to share it, and then he would freak out. And so the whole day was about the car. Oh, so-and-so's got my car. No, 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 no. So I just made a deal, and I just said, okay, here's a shelf, and before you cross over the threshold into the house, I want you to put your car on the shelf if you don't want to share it. And it'll be safe there, but I don't want any hassles about the car. We're going to share stuff, and the other kids need to share stuff with you, and so that's only fair. And I remember going through this quite a big thing, and I think it had a lot to do with how I felt kind of violated as a kid in a number of ways. But when my nieces would come and they'd be allowed to come in my room and play with anything they wanted to, and they would do these things to that were quite destructive sometimes. And there's two of them and one of me. And I did feel kind of like I didn't have an advocate. And I think that's the great thing about being a Christian, because I know that I have an advocate in Jesus. I have an advocate that is on my side, and that, I've never felt like a victim. And I was just dealing with someone yesterday who is always a victim. And I never want to be that person. But I think what happens whenever I go there, there's always somebody to say, hey, you're not a victim, whether it's the voice in my head or a person around me. Because, I don't want to be seen as a victim. So I think that it's something that I've asked people to catch me up on if that happens. So this is longer than I thought it was going to be. One of the things I wanted to do was to just go over to Red Pill Square, which is the website that we often refer to on this channel. I'm just trying to take a look at this because I've got a new system. So I'm just literally working on this as we go. Let me just see if I can. Okay, I'm just going to go and do a little thing here. Let's slide up here. Again, I don't really want to focus too much on Elizabeth Warren. That is not my intent in the situation. But what I'm trying to do is just bring it around to the logical conclusion, I suppose, that when we have people who are supposed to be our leaders, who show leadership, who are doing things that are they're predicated on a lie, and it goes back to this whole thing of whether we know we're lying or whether we think, we don't realize we're lying. I have to say, when I look at someone like Elizabeth Warren, I'm incredibly disappointed, because somebody said to me a couple of years ago, they said, oh, what do you think about Elizabeth Warren? I hadn't really looked into it. But I think what's happened recently has allowed us to be able to look back at things that did happen a long time ago. And I would have never known about them. This whole thing about Pocahontas, it may seem like a joke, but it's not funny. I think Trump, goes to the heart of things, and he puts his finger on something. He knows a lot more than I do about what's happening. And he shows people for what they are, like it or don't like it, But I would rather somebody be honest and point out these things, especially if you're in the limelight, and if you're going to be a leader, then you'd better be able to back that up. So I was looking into some of this stuff just on my own, just to see some of the things in the background of Elizabeth Warren, without all the other echo chamber stuff and all the humor and all the rest of it. This is pretty serious. This is the Harvard Crimson. And this is from, if you look at the date here, it's from October 22nd, 1996. So this is quite a while ago. And if you go down here, she is named, we'll go down here. So what they're talking about is the problem with diversity. So this is 1996. They were already looking at diversity and and it was funny at the very end. It says that they have yet to actually hire an openly Republican member of the faculty. But be that as it may, without getting into the politics of it, I think it's interesting. It says CCR is an organization of law students dedicated to increasing the number of women and minorities on the faculty and promoting diversity, according to second-year student Rudy M. Reyes. I'm going to say that's Reyes, co-chair of the organization, and that being CCR. A black male from the lower socioeconomic background will approach the study of constitutional law in a different way from a white upper-class male, Reyes says. Okay, so that's fine. So we're talking about diversity, and this is the Harvard Law School after all, so we need to have diversity. And so we go down to, we have these different professors of law, and they express their support for increased representation of minorities. So this is important for us to understand. The fact is, there never have been Asian Americans, Native Americans, gays, lesbians, Latinos, Latinas, and women of color on the faculty is a subject of major concern, says Wilkins, who is black, and he's also one of the professors. Of 71 current law school professors and assistant professors, 11 are women, 5 are black, 1 is Native American, and 1 is Hispanic, says Mike Chmura, spokesperson for the law school. Okay, this is the important one right here. Although the conventional wisdom among students and faculty is that the law school faculty include no minority women, Chmura said Professor of Law Elizabeth Warren is Native American. I just want you to take that in, because people will say, well, she didn't get the job by, saying that she was Native American, da-da-da-da. Well, clearly in 1996, she was identifying as Native American. And I find that to be really horrendous in light of what we've been looking at. And I probably never would have seen this article. I noticed that we're not seeing it being talked about. And people will say, well, she just, said that she was Native American because she thought she was. This is serious. They're looking for diversity. They're saying that there's a need for there to be a different perspective on the faculty, and that's the purpose behind it. It's not so that a person can get onto the faculty because they want to further their career, or they want a job in the faculty of law at Harvard. This is the kind of lying that I'm talking about. This is the kind of lying that we allow for, and that I think, I'm not going to get into the Democratic Republican aspect of it. I'm just saying, regardless, there's people in every party, on every side and of every stripe, that lie. And, had the whole thing of Pocahontas not come out, Elizabeth Warren probably would have run for president in 2020. She may still do. I don't know. And people may look the other way. And this is not meant in any way to be a political situation. It's in context of what I've been talking about up until now, and how we lie to ourselves. We put ourselves into this position where we don't have integrity in our words. And then we put ourselves forward. Can you imagine if, that's a presidential candidate, but it's at the very least a Harvard Law School professor, and also a person who is a representative, a political representative at this point. And, the response is, how dare you criticize me? How dare you say that I got this through some sort of ill-gotten gain or whatever. No, this is really wrong. This is although the conventional wisdom among students and faculty is that the law school faculty includes no minority women, Chmura said Professor of Law Elizabeth Warren is Native American. In response to criticism of the current administration, Chmura pointed to good progress in recent years. It just makes an absolute mockery. It's a sham. This really floors me. So this is the Harvard Crimson, and you'll see it on Red Pill Square. I've actually just reprinted it on the site Red Pill Square here, and I've put the original link right down here if you want to go to it. But for any of you that don't get it, I really want you to think about this. I really want you to think about this, because I think this is what our school system is doing. It's getting us not to think. It's getting us to be dumbed down. And it's not just dumbed down intellectually, but it's a dumbed down in terms of our integrity, and in terms of our honesty, and in terms of what we're willing to put up with as far as people lying to us. And we wonder why we have a society that is predicated on lies. And I still get very frustrated and very angry with lies. And I look at Jesus overturning the tables. He wasn't, he was angry. It says we can get angry, but not to sin. And the sin is to separate ourselves. To me, like that's what sin is. We're separated from God by our own choice or from each other. And I see that the lies really separate us from each other. And so what I would suggest is that we can be angry, but that we keep our relationships intact, meaning that our anger is righteous. It's not about trying to defend ourselves for having said that we were Native American on our application to teach at the Harvard Law School. It's about when the money changers are using the temple for ill-gotten gain. So one of the other things I wanted to show as well. Now let me just see if I can. Okay. So this is the other one. So this is the other one. Okay. This is not pick on Elizabeth Warren Day. I did talk about this in the previous video, and it was quite short, but it just comes into the context of all of the things that I've been thinking about being in denial and the kinds of lies that we tell ourselves. But when we go out in public and we start to perpetrate these kind of lies, what kind of brain damage must we have to be able to do this? And who could make a cookbook based on their Cherokee heritage, and coincidentally, this is 2012. Okay, so let's see what the other one was. 1996. So this was quite. So 2012, I think, was when she was first considering getting into sort of the upper echelon of politics, when she was considering a presidential run. I don't think she was considering at that point, but it was just when women were going to run for president and all the rest of it. So, but Massachusetts Democratic Senate candidate Elizabeth Warren is yet again in hot water after new allegations have surfaced that she plagiarized her Cherokee recipes in the book Pow Wow Chow from the New York Times and other publications. Now you can read this if you're interested. Go on over to Red Pill Square. I've got it there. And this is yet another one. It's not just that she's identified herself as Cherokee, which is a lie, which we've now found out is a lie. I mean, she's no more Cherokee than, and by the way, the test that they used was actually not even for indigenous North American Indians. It was for Mexicans and South American Indians. So it didn't even prove anything conclusively about that heritage anyway, but at the very most it said that she might be a little bit Mexican or something. But so not only is she identifying appropriating, this is called cultural appropriation, folks, where you take somebody else's culture and you see yourself as being part of that. Not only is this cultural appropriation, but she also stole the recipes. So if you look through this was in 2012. So this, again, I want to make it so it's dispassionate. It's not just me ragging on about something again. This is talking about the destruction and the travesty that we wreak in each other's lives when we lie to them. And I have to say that the last year and a half, after Tom's death and having to go through all of the different things I've gone through, and I became homeless, and I'm cobbling things together again. I left a situation where I had a place that was rat infested, yes, but I traded it for something that was far more insidious, and I lost everything. Again, I lost all of my stuff. His daughter locked everything behind doors. I mean, she accused me of things. There's all sorts of things that I went through. You would think that I would have learned. And but I didn't. And I have to say that I did have one friend that could really see the problem with Tom and his alcoholism, and I didn't see it. I didn't understand it. And it's not just being an alcoholic, but I think the fact that somebody is an alcoholic just makes them more prone to deception if they're trying to hide what they're doing. And I was very naive, and I'm here to tell you that that naivete led to me losing everything. And so I'm back at this, and I'm trying very hard to reestablish myself and to cobble things together. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the upcoming project that I have going on. And I'm not defeated in any way, shape, or form. I'm just going back to what I was doing. I'm sort of picking up where I left off. But this particular situation with Elizabeth Warren really irks me because, here's a woman in politics, and we have the two women that could have made an impact, that could have done something really positive, have proven themselves. And, there's the witch, as they call her, and now Elizabeth, Pocahontas, have proven themselves to be incredibly corrupt. Incredibly corrupt. I see this as incredible corruption, because if you're willing to pass yourself off as something that you're not, or you're willing to get rid of your enemies, your opponents, in whatever way you need to do that, to lie, to cheat, how are you any better than any other politician that's come along? Or man, woman, I don't care, Cherokee, non-Cherokee, I don't care who it is. You've now sullied the whole playing field again. And this idea of women coming forward and being believed and all the rest of it, it's, the ones that come forward that don't have a story to tell make it very hard for the people like me and like my daughter and other women who do have a story to tell, who should be believed. And they create a whole environment of mistrust and distrust because of their lies. And I think it's really important that we share this message with other people, and I hope you will. Maybe you don't want to use this whole video, but please read it yourself and get this information. I'm going to be putting more things up on Red Pill Square and coming back on and trying to show you another perspective that you might want to use with yourself. And it's not about politics. It's about the fact that we have these people that are just part of the swamp, and that people like Trump will come along, like him or not like him, but they just put their finger on it, and I can relate to it because I'm often that person that comes along and says, I don't believe you. When I finally figure it out, I will say it in the strongest possible terms. I don't believe you, and here's my evidence. You've lied to me. You've really taken my trust and abused it. And I think someone like Elizabeth Warren has taken our trust and abused it completely. Here's her family. And here's the original post that she stole from 1979. Anyway, again, it's not important. The details aren't important. But the principle is incredibly important, that we need to have integrity, that we need to be impeccable with our words, and that when things are seem like they're not right, go with that. Go with that instinct. And I didn't. And anything that happens as a result of that is purely my own silliness and my own problem. I want to leave us on a positive note. Even when these things happen, I decided to put Psalm 91 here because it was brought back to my mind, and it's an incredibly beautiful psalm. And a friend of mine used to do these beautiful pieces of artwork, and she would put our favorite scriptures, she would incorporate them into the artwork. And this was my favorite psalm even at that time, and that was probably in the 80s. So this was one of them. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. That's a big word. I can trust the Lord, even when I can't trust the people around me, or even myself. When I take I step back and I look at the fact that God has been with me throughout this whole process, whether it's been the last 18 months or the last decades. I can always look back and say, He's been incredibly gracious despite the missteps or the bad choices I've made. And despite the fact that other people may say, I'm not with you anymore, or I never was with you, or they're abandoning you for whatever reason. I just look at this psalm and I say, in whom I trust. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. And it's an amazing psalm, and I thought it was really important to just put it onto the site. And I think I'm probably, when I get any scriptures or when I get things that are inspirational, I think it's really important to include those things and to share them with people that I care about deeply, like my audience. And I so thank you very much for putting up with all of the blah-blah-blah. But I hope that there's something that you might have gleaned in all of this that might be helpful and might be useful in your own circumstances. If people have been betraying you, or that you have felt like you have you've been lied to or cheated on, or that there's something in your life, like with me, where I was hemorrhaging, where there's, sometimes we just need to say, like, that's why I'm saying it now, because it's not mitigating circumstances. Okay. There's nothing about it where I say, I want to be seen as a victim, or I want to have people feel sorry for me, but I'm able to let myself off the hook sometimes and say, I was pushed and pushed and pushed, and people were, whether it's somebody writing on my dolly and I had to just be quiet about it, or where things were just unfair, and you get pushed and pushed and pushed, and and like with my dad, I guess he was just lying there trying to sleep and knew that he had to go to work the next day, and all he could hear was that door closing the wrong way. And his response was to come out and get mad and to say, this is how we close the door. Turn the handle, close it, turn the handle, open it, And for the person who's on the receiving end of that, they can end up having the same, or at least traces of the same problem. And that's where my problems with PTSD began. And I ended up inviting people into my life that were very much like that, because I was used to it. And then it just exacerbates, the problem, because you end up getting hit over the head or pushed downstairs or whatever it is, and unless you learn to, and I did learn to draw my boundaries at that point. I did leave that relationship. But it was only many, many years later that I was able to have a conversation about that. And I so wish that Ken were still alive, so that we could continue to talk about it and be honest about some of those things, because we were just beginning that process of being honest and coming clean and saying, that underneath it all, we really care for one another. And in fact, we really love each other. And I just hope there are people in your life that you can really rely on, because I'm finding that it's very difficult to find them. And I'm trying to be reliable in what I do here. And if you have any ideas about what you would like to do with the show, if you'd like me to cover anything, I will be covering some things. I'm writing a book, and so I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that I'm writing about. And I do hope to have Dr. Judy on again, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to come on too, is just to say that I want to have integrity and to carry on in whatever way that is going to be a blessing to the people who have been so faithful to this channel. And if you want to like, subscribe, share, make sure you press the notification bell. There's going to be lots more things coming from the Airstream Studio, and it's not always going to be me blah blah blahing here, which you'll be happy to know. I'm going to do some tours and show you around. I'm going to have some of my musician friends come and play, and I'm going to be doing some interviews, and again talking about some of the themes from the book that I'm writing as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I so appreciate it. I really do. I just think it's amazing to have a group of people, because sometimes it's sometimes it can be difficult to go through these things, and it feels a little bit lonely sometimes. And I know that I've got you guys out there, and I hope you feel the same, that there are people, whether this channel or other channels, that are your YouTube friends. your it's a privilege anyway for me to be able to come on and talk to you. And I thank you very much for being there, and we'll see you again soon.